Hi, everybody. I'm Vince Mickens with the Private Air Media Group. Today is another edition. That's actually the 35th edition of our webcast of All Things Aviation and Aerospace. Happy Earth Day, everyone, to my guests and to everybody watching. It's another great day of celebration. This is actually the 51st Earth Day. So I'm going to tell on myself. I think I was a freshman in high school. The first Earth Day, that was on April 22nd in 1970. So I know I don't look it, but yep, it's true. Anyhow, and actually,
Isn't every day a Earth Day though?
yeah, exactly, exactly. Every day is an Earth Day. I was going to say, I think that it takes on a more significant meaning too, Dr. Ericsson, in terms of the of people paying more attention and being more interested in what's going on with our climate and our ecology, et cetera, and how it affects our daily lives. And I don't know if you call that more of being more socially conscious or whatever, but I do think it's more in the forefront than it ever has been. And today, speaking of climate and that type of thing, I saw some, I don't know the specifics of it. I didn't have a chance to really pay attention to it because of prep this morning, but that the president has made some announcements about some goals with regard to emissions. I think to reduce emissions by 50% in a relatively short period of time. So sounded familiar because I think that was a goal during Obama's presidency, and then it got kind of kicked to the curb, and now it's back again. So hopefully it'll stick around this time and work. Anyhow, that's it for politics. But I do think, this being Earth Day, this is a perfect time to talk with you guys about the significant role that NASA plays in Earth science research using the latest Earth systems technologies. It is truly an honor and privilege to have what I consider a total spectrum of guests, one from one of the leading NASA engineering forces to be reckoned with. I would call you that, Dr. Ericsson, who's been at NASA for nearly 30 years. Also, we have a research scientist who practically grew up in the backyard of NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. And we have a young genius. Yes, I'm going to call you a genius, Janelle, over there on the West Coast. She's shaking her head no. At the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. We'll be excited to hear about what you're doing out there. Now, I know this is a show for young viewers, their parents, and those curious about aviation and aerospace. But after researching these guests, I got to tell you, I have a zillion questions myself for you guys. I'm not going to get them in, of course, but I do, because it's pretty fascinating what you do. Most people don't think of NASA in terms of this type of work. Everybody always associates it, rightfully so, with sending astronauts out to space, into the space station, et cetera, and with the goals of going back to the moon and going to Mars. And there's, some people are excited, as I was, about the Perseverance rover. And then as a pilot, I was very excited about the Ingenuity helicopter making its first flight on another planet. That was pretty darn cool. So but it's something that the things that you guys do, you don't hear that much about. So it really is great to have you guys on the show today, particularly Earth Day, to talk about some of what you guys do. So, as I alluded to earlier, joining us today is Dr. Aprille Ericsson with the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. Dr. Ericsson, who currently is the new business lead for Instrument Systems and Technology Division, is an aerospace engineer, a professor, a technologist, and a program manager. Probably a few other things you can tell us about too. Dr. Ericsson has a degree in aeronautical and astronautical engineering from MIT, as well as receiving her master and PhD in mechanical engineering, aerospace option from Howard University. So Dr. Ericsson, or Dr. E, as we've been told we could call you, as your students call you, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. And that student, it goes past just the collegiate, because I also work with K through 12, running my DMV NSBE Junior chapter. So I have touch in sort of all phases of education. So I think I have a strong passion for educating our communities and our students. So thank you for having me here today.
Absolutely. And a little later in the show, let's talk about NSBE and that chapter and what you guys do. I think it's really good for people to know about that may not be familiar with it. And I know some other people that are involved with that, and it's helped them a lot with their careers. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's also my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ryan Kramer, also with the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center and the University of Maryland, Baltimore. Dr. Kramer is an assistant research scientist at the Joint Center for Earth Systems Technology, and he also works with the Climate and Radiation Lab. I know it sounds like a mouthful, but I'm sure he's going to tell us all about it. Dr. Kramer, thank you very much for being on the show today.
Yeah, really happy to be here. It's always a good chance to kind of inspire the next generation. We're going to need all of you to help us with all the science questions that we want to answer. So happy to share my story and give you at least one avenue for getting to where I'm at.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is going to be great to talk with all of you guys about what you're doing and everything. That brings me to our rising star, Janelle Wellons, also an MIT graduate. And Janelle is a mission and instrument operations systems engineer, another mouthful, for the Instrument Operations Engineering Group. Thank you. So at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory out there in Pasadena, California. And since you chimed in, welcome.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Vince. I'm so excited to be able to talk about Earth science today, because like you said, sometimes people don't realize how much NASA is really doing and how much we care about our own planet. And it's our home and we should care about it.
And how much we care about our pets, our cat. So and you're rocking those headsets.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a gamer. I have to represent.
So we have a lot of ground to cover, thanks to you guys being so accomplished and Earth science being such an important topic. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Ericsson. I'm sorry, Dr. E. I'm going to make it easy for myself. What were you like as a kid? You know, were you taking things apart and putting them back together? How did you start out getting into what you do now as a career?
So first of all, I was what they typically call a tom girl, meaning that I did things that weren't traditionally what they envisioned for girls. So I played all kinds of sports, very athletic, was great at math and science. I love putting things together. I didn't take them apart until they were broken, and then I might fix something. I'd like to fix things. And I had two grandfathers who were both practicing engineers. And fortunately to me, they never said, like, a girl can't do this. You know, they were very encouraging. They allowed me to look over their shoulder. They had me up on the scaffold helping to paint the house. My grandfather fed me really well when he had me do that in the mornings.
That's always a good incentive.
Right. But I had one grandfather who was a tinkerer, and, you know, he worked as the chief engineer for the Sheraton Hotel. This is the Commander Hotel in Harvard Square. Very well into almost, I believe he was almost 70 when he was, you know, when he finally relinquished that job. But he would take me down in the basement and said, you could find anything you need here. You know, I think he was feeling the push of the new big era of big stores, hardware stores, but he said, you could find everything here. And so he always taught me how to sort of work with my hands and put things together. But I really had that knack for it, you know, working on my bike, or, you know, first time anything came in the house, I wanted to be the one to put it together. So I really appreciated that. And then I had my other grandfather was big on scouting. And so I was a Girl Scout, but he actually did a lot of scouting exercises, and he helped me win my first big science fair. I wanted was second place, but it was my first instrument. And so that instrument only cost us maybe $1.50 to make. It was a glass milk bottle barometer. And
oh, wow.
yeah. So you
cool.
and I could talk all about the science and how it was important to us as citizens. And I think that's really why I won second place. First place was a hovercraft, and who could compete against a hovercraft? It was a kit.
Yeah, really. Who had
Yeah.
the money to put one together?
Well, that's the other thing. The kid that had it, they were affluent family, whereas my family was not as affluent. But the thing was that I really understood the impact and the role that what we needed in science. And so fast forward to my last instrument, which was $500 million. I think I really grew up, but it was always interesting to see how that came full circle. And I ended up doing instrument management later in my career.
Yeah. So when you were doing all of this, when did you know that you were going to, or when was NASA on the radar? Was that during high school or not till college or?
So I grew up with NASA, right? First grade, I actually got to see men go to the moon because a parent actually brought a TV to school. So all of us little first graders kind of crowded around the TV, and we actually got to see them go to the moon, which I thought that's pretty cool. But I remember us saying how we thought those guys were so old. Hey, we were first graders, so we were like 6 years old.
Right.
And so people in their 30s really seemed old to us. And I remember calculating, what year that would be when I would be their age, and, sort of put that seed in my mind. But I must say that as time passed, there were lots of other things that I thought I would do. And funny thing is, I've kind of done quite a number of them. I was very athletic, so I've coached teams. I also, love to teach. I was always the teacher's helper. I was a really smart kid. So particularly when we had students that came in with second languages, their first language being, something other than English, I would help. And
that's nice.
Yeah, I was just that aspiring kid, and I loved math and science. I was just great at it. So that theme kind of wove through my life. But I was very fortunate. My mom was sort of adamant about trying other things. So I was very well rounded, and I think that's really important.
Sure. Thank you for sharing that with us. Dr. Kramer, you were fascinated by weather as a kid. So that was the beginning for you. How did that all come about?
Yeah, so I'm sure it would be interesting to talk to an anthropologist one day and get their thoughts on this, but most meteorologists found a fascination with weather when they were really young. If you get a chance to ever ask your local weather person, they'll probably tell you the same thing. And so for some people, it was a specific storm that sparked it. And I can't trace it back exactly, but it was around the time of the blizzard of 1996 in the Washington, D.C. area, which was a big blizzard where I really became interested in weather. I would have been around 5 years old at the time. And that just kind of carried through my childhood. I wouldn't say I was ever obsessed with science or tinker or anything like that, but I was always watching the Weather Channel, or I was sitting outside during a rainstorm. So the weather was always sort of a constant in my life, and it dictated. I knew from very early on that I wanted to pursue it as a career. And that's what led me to my college degrees, and step by step led me to doing climate science at NASA.
When did you make that shift to wanting to do the more scientific aspect of it in terms of being a scientist and doing research and that type of thing, rather than being a meteorologist on a TV station?
Yeah, so that didn't really happen until college. I went to Penn State University for my meteorology degree, which is a really big program, which has the advantage of you can kind of try everything. So I tried TV. We had like a little studio in our department, and I enjoyed it, but didn't love it. You realize how difficult it is to use a green screen, for example. And it's also, you have to really be passionate about TV, because to start out, you're making no money. You may not be in the most desirable of locations.
Right.
And so if you don't have that passion immediately for TV, there's other good options out there in terms of meteorology. So eventually I wanted to become a forecaster. This is probably by my end of my freshman year.
In terms of as a meteorologist? As
a meteorologist. And there's a bit of a distinction. People may not realize that your TV weather person does their own forecast. They forecast the weather, but they also, as a big resource, they use forecasts from the government, the National Weather Service.
Right.
And so that's a career path in itself, to become just a pure, what we call operational forecaster for the government or for a private corporation. And so I kind of dabbled in that for a little bit during my undergraduate career, and enjoyed it as well, but didn't really find I was extremely passionate about it. And eventually just landed on research. I applied for internships, I believe it was my sophomore year, TV internship, pure forecasting internship, and a research internship at NASA Goddard. And that's the one I got. And
the rest is history.
Exactly.
And also, we can always blame the weatherman now. I know just to blame them directly. They're the ones that made the forecast and messed it up. Okay. Thank you for sharing that.
That's right.
No, Janelle, I'm gonna have a little fun with you so Janelle, your background is pretty interesting. You are originally from Jersey. I'll let you tell us about that. But what got my attention, I was looking at your list of hobbies, and you got this, you like to travel, you like the outdoors, you like scuba diving, and apparently you're really big on playing video games. And then I saw this other hobby, and I'm embarrassed to say that I had to look it up because I just didn't recognize it.
I know where this is going.
I have daughters, and I didn't want to ask them because they would give me that, Dad, really? You don't know what that is? But is it called cosplaying?
Cosplaying, yes.
Yeah. So what is this cosplaying stuff? Let me let you describe it. I could go by the definition that I read on the computer, but
sure. I'm really a newbie in that space. I got into watching anime when I was in college, really. I grew up watching things like Dragon Ball, Naruto, but then I didn't realize that there's tons of anime shows that you can watch. And so I watched them. And when I moved out to LA, I learned about all the different conventions. There's conventions for just about anything in LA. There's like a cookie convention. I mean, seriously, you'll never get bored. And when I saw that there were anime conventions, I kind of researched it a bit and saw that people would dress up as the characters that they watched. And so I thought the most interesting part of cosplay was that you could make your own costumes. And so actually in the background, you see this skull thing here?
Yes, we do.
This is actually part of one of my cosplays. It's a headpiece from a video game I played called Breath of the Wild. It's in the Zelda universe for people who know what that is. And I've always loved video games. And I think I love anime for the same reason. And it's that they tell beautiful stories and they put the person watching it right in the middle of it. Yeah. And I think that actually is part of why growing up, I had this affinity for learning more. Didn't matter what it was, but I just wanted to learn more. I was so curious. How do you put a disc in a box and that plays a game on your TV? That fascinated me. So I definitely think it's played a large part.
Your curiosity. So in all fairness to you, I'm more than teasing you. What I really wanted to point out is, it's people tend to look at engineering as something that's more technical and more, for lack of a better term, kind of nerdy or whatever. And to know that you do something fun like that as an example, I think it's really good for people to hear, to know that, yeah, you can be really great with your curiosity about how a disc works inside of a Xbox or something, but at the same time, you have fun. So, and that's really cool. Speaking of that though, so as you did that and you started really having that curiosity, when did that move into you knowing that you were going to be interested in maybe studying engineering and developing from there? And by the way, MIT, I mean, that's the school.
Honestly, I had no idea what I was doing growing up. Not a single clue. I grew up in the type of environment that Dr. E described. It's a tomboy. It's like, give me the Barbie doll. I'll strap it to a remote control car and drive it down the stairs. Like that was the kind of kid that I was. My dad, he claims he didn't say this. This is what I said. I said that he always wanted a son and I came first. So he just treated me like his son. And I'm so appreciative for that. It meant that when we went to Toys R Us, we didn't go straight to the pink aisle. I could go and get whatever I wanted, whether that be Legos, action figures. And of course, my mom still had me get the Barbie playhouse, the horses. I honestly loved it all. I never felt constrained. And that's honestly the biggest gift that my parents and my family could have ever given me. Neither one of my parents are in STEM. No one in my immediate family was an engineer. I didn't have that around me. But when I got to school, I definitely realized that I loved math, absolutely loved math. And it wasn't the only love I had either. I also really loved literature, English, reading. I still do to this day. And I was going into high school. I was hearing my classmates talking about, what they wanted to do when they grew up. Oh, I want to go to this school. I want to get this degree, and I want to go and do this as a career. And I didn't really have that kind of planning going on inside my own head. I just knew that I liked a lot of things. I liked learning how the world worked. My mom says I had a definite affinity for the science and the math, but it still wasn't concrete. I was doing Model Congress. I could have been a lawyer. I had so many interests, and I did sports as well. And so when junior year came around, I had to start getting a little bit serious about it, because you had to be applying to colleges. That's what you were going to do. And I had no clue where to start, not a single clue. Neither of my parents graduated with their bachelors, but they did go to school, and it was local. And so when I started getting mail from all these colleges around the nation, I didn't know what to do with it. I started putting it under my bed. I started putting it in the trash when I ran out of space there.
Oh my God.
And on one of these days that I got this pile of mail, my mom stopped me, because on top there was this pamphlet from a school called the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a place I had never heard of in my entire life.
Wow.
And she had heard of it, though. She worked with engineers. While she wasn't an engineer, she worked with them, and she knew that school. And we looked at the pamphlet, and it was talking about this summer program. You go, you learn with other students, you learn about engineering, STEM, and you stay for about 6 weeks or so. And it's all expenses paid as long as you get in. And so, of course, she had me apply to that. It's like, okay, whatever. I'll apply, write the essays. I totally forgot about it. And one of my classmates asked, what are you going to do for the summer? And I said, oh, I'm going to run cross country. And then I remembered this program, and I was like, oh, if I get accepted into this program, it's at a school called MIT, then I'm going to do that. And he made me aware for the first time that MIT was a really hard school to get into.
Right.
And it's like world renowned. And I'm like, well, we can wrap that up, because I'm definitely not getting into there. I was not number one in my class. I was not valedictorian. I made mistakes. I didn't have straight A's. And so why would a place like MIT, that kind of reputation, take someone like me? But lo and behold, one day in the spring, my mom calls me. She's like, come home, Janelle, come home. I'm like, why? She's like, you got a package from MIT. I'm like, well, I don't know what you're getting excited for.
Well, package is already a good point.
It clicked
it's
for
more
me.
than a letter, so you got a chance.
Exactly. I get home. I'm like, why are you? She said the same thing. She's like, Janelle, you think they sent you a package to tell you didn't get in? I was like, oh. So, I opened it up, and the rest is really history.
Wow.
It went from
what
not
great
being a place.
Story.
Yeah.
what a great story. So many, I hope not only our viewers, but when the show gets passed around to other people and they pull it up, they hear your story. That is a fantastic story, because so many people, the assumption is that you were on track to go to a school like MIT and you were the top of your class and all of the above. And that's just a fantastic story. So yeah, very cool. Okay, we're going to get down to some brass tacks here a little bit and get into a little bit more specifics about, take sort of a deep dive into what you guys do and the opportunities that are available to the up and coming generation of young aerospace professionals. And I'll start with you, Dr. E. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Earth Systems technology as it relates to Earth science? And first, actually tell us, what you do and things like that.
Okay, so NASA Goddard Space Flight Center actually supports 4 different science areas. It's earth science, heliophysics, planetary science, and I'm missing one. What am I missing? Oh, astrophysics. And so I actually support all of those science areas as well as cross-cutting technology. So we have, and then we do also communications. So that's really big aspects to sort of what we do in terms of creating space flight hardware that support those goals and those capabilities. So earth science is one of our premier ones. We do also partner with JPL, and we have a very large group of, I would say, earth science modelers at our Goddard Space Flight Institute of Space and Studies. Let me see. Yes. Institute for Space Studies. And so they actually do a lot of earth science modeling. And then, of course, we get a lot of our directed earth science sort of from the engineering perspective, the requirements that flow down from headquarters, and they look at the decadal surveys that are done, every 10 years. There are different science focuses for the decadal surveys. And so that's really sort of how it flows down. So scientists across the country participate in the decadal studies. The requirements for those missions are sort of derived from the focus of those missions. And then myself as an engineer become the implementer along the side, beside the scientists like Ryan. Ryan is a perfect example of somebody who I would partner with. I noticed that he has UMBC, so he's partly working, I guess, with UMBC and Goddard. So I'm actually working on a proposal right now that's going to be submitted tomorrow to do that kind of partnership and work together, focusing on capabilities that would improve upon our ability to make measurements, earth science. One of the largest missions, there are actually several that come to remind mind of the work that I've done. I did attitude control systems first before I became a manager. And so I helped to control spacecraft's motion and position in space. And one of the first missions that I worked on was called the Tropical Rainfall Measuring Mission. And there we wanted to really look at the rainfall. It was actually our first US space-borne radar system. So it was actually very impactful. We worked with Japan on that mission, and it was actually
so it's something you put in orbit and then sends a radar
orbit
back to Earth, and you read that?
Yes. So I guess I should break it down more, huh?
Yeah, just for lay terms, for everybody that's not necessarily in the industry yet.
Right. And so radar, we actually use radar quite a bit on the ground. Like when you think about when your family member is driving and they get a ticket for speeding, they use a radar system to be able to tell the speed as to how someone is moving. But in many other applications from the sky, we use the radar to look at topography, as well as, in this case, I've mentioned rain. We look at cloud formation, ice, and ice cloud formation and other things. So it's a very prominent way to make measurements in earth science. The other area that I've done measurements for earth science is in the instrumentation is called a LiDAR, or laser altimetry, where you use a laser beam to focus down to the surface, and then quickly you'd have that beam rebound into a detector system. That detector system looks at the time that the beam was sent down, and so you measure the distance very accurately by knowing the time. Again, that also allows us to measure topography, but in the particular one that I'm thinking of, ISAT, which is the Atlas instrument on the ISAT-2 mission. I also worked on ISAT-1, but ISAT-2 was a movement from one consecutive beam to 6 beams, which helped you to look at sort of when you might, if you imagine you're on an ice sheet and there may be a deep crevice. Well, you can tell better with these 2 pairs of 3 whether or not it's actually a hill, a slope, or a crevice, because you've got multiple beam patterns in a very small, tight area.
Sure.
So we're able to measure missions that went to the moon, like Lola, which is on the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbit, down to 3 centimeters in resolution. And so the better we get with resolving these surfaces, we're able to look at the changes in our ice sheets. which of course is part of the global warming issues that we have around our world.
Yeah, Dr. E, one of the things I like to point out too is that you guys work in pretty large teams. You have a lot of different areas of expertise or disciplines that are involved with each project. And some of those people there are Goddard and, well, you can tell.
So the teams are growing. I mentioned that we often work with not just our science teams on the center, but we also work with other centers. So JPL is one of our partners, Langley Research Center, but then we also work with universities, quite a number of universities. And then lastly is not to forget the industry partner. So more and more we push to the industry partner to actually create the spacecraft buses, which are the things that get us there, keep us in location position, provide the power that's necessary to run either the spacecraft itself or the actual instrumentation. And then you need the comm, of course, to be able to communicate back to the ground and send the data back down to the ground. And I think Ryan will probably be able to talk quite a bit about how he takes that data and creates models. But we also have our engineers that support the development of what we call a delivery of data products. And so there are lots of facets to how the teams all pull together and the many different partners to pull these large missions together.
Which also means there's a lot of opportunities. So Ryan, Dr. Kramer, you were, this is a perfect segue to you because you work at the Climate and Radiation Laboratory primarily, right? And then can you tell us, which I think relates to what Dr. E was just talking about, the Joint Center for Earth Systems Technology, what that's all about, and how that relates to the Climate and Radiation Laboratory and everything that she just said that you interface with.
Yeah, so the Joint Center for Earth Systems Technology, I had to think about, make sure I had the acronym correct, is a department within the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And something that people may not realize is that NASA is a federal agency, of course, but really, especially on the science side, only a segment of the NASA workforce is actually a federal employee. Most of us are what you call contractors, including myself. So the federal government will give private companies or universities grant money to hire their own scientists and work on NASA projects. So that's my situation. So that's why on the Zoom you may see UMBC after NASA. So I work physically, at least during normal times, at the Climate and Radiation Lab at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, but I'm affiliated with University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and my lab at NASA has a special agreement, a cooperative agreement, I think it's officially called, with UMBC to do science for NASA. And so there's a decent sized chunk of our lab are UMBC employees. And that's my situation. So I work just as a federal NASA scientist employee would, working on the same type of problems and using the same source of grant funding.
In lay terms, can you tell us what those example of the kind of problems you work on and how that correlates with the systems technology?
Absolutely. Yeah, so my research is focused in a way sort of on pure climate science. I'm trying to understand how climate change today, what it means for climate change tomorrow. We're going to see, as we continue to increase greenhouse gas emissions, continued warming, and with that, changes in clouds, changes in water vapor, and NASA satellites measure all these things. And so it's my job to use the satellite data from the satellites built by the engineering side to really understand these processes and find new and interesting ways of taking the satellite data to understand our planet better. And I think one important part of the job is really digging into what kind of information we can get from these satellites. A lot of our biggest advancements in science come from using satellites for reasons that don't exactly match their initial intention.
Oh, wow.
And so there's this constant feedback between the scientists doing work and that informing the engineering that goes on to develop the next generation of satellites. And there's a lot of steps in between. I mean, I use kind of the end result data, but the data that comes exactly from the satellite goes through steps until it becomes something that we can use to study the physical world. And my science influences all those steps along the way, and all those steps along the way influence my science.
Gotcha. And do you, I guess this is a question back for you, Dr. E. Does what they need in terms of that information that they've come about, does that influence the work that you guys do as you tweak or engineer the technology?
For sure. You know, the scientists really tried hard to develop requirements that we call flow down requirements. So they start off with their science needs, and then eventually it boils down to, okay, we need to be able to have this amount of data. We have to have data compression, or we have, so then that means how fast can we compile that data, or how fast can we slew into position to make the right observation? You know, those are the ways when I say slew, that means rotate into position to look at and observe a particular item. And so all this is the case for all of our science missions. We always have this very close partnership between engineering and science to make sure that we can meet the science capabilities. And of course, there are times when it becomes really tough and we find that the technology is not capable. So then we have to go back to the science teams and sort of work with them to say, okay, what is your threshold? What is your goal? What's the minimum, to kind of do these trades so that we can actually deliver them something that provides the capabilities that they need for the mission. It's a very interesting partnership, almost like a couple relationship, right? Because our success, helps them with their success,
and vice versa.
One of the things that I always find the hardest to do with scientists is what I call requirements creep. And what that means is, when you say, okay, I can do this, and they go, give me more. But that impacts.
That's very real.
Yes, and that impacts our ability to deliver on time, right? Because we now have this request that changes and ripples through the whole development of either the instrument or the spacecraft bus. And so it's a very tight line that we walk to try to be able to deliver them the capabilities they need to achieve the science. And
Gotcha.
We also are very close to the public. So we also do want to be able to, as engineers, be able to articulate what those science needs are, what the science capabilities are, because we're a large part of the team. And that's part of the NASA mission, is really to educate the public, to have an impact for our communities. And we want to be able to articulate that. So we learn science along the way.
Is that part of the globe, you guys call the Globe Observer Citizen Science? Does that have something to do with that too, in terms of feedback from the public?
Say the title again.
I read something in the research we were doing, a Globe Observer Citizen Science.
Oh yes, that's a large program, and Ryan probably knows about that. Citizen science is really an opportunity for people in our community to contribute to science. So I actually signed my daughter up it's between the two of us, but to make observation of clouds. And you can actually take pictures of clouds and then load them up. There's so many ways that people can contribute to science. One of my favorite is actually, it's not so much atmospheric science, but it's making observations of whale sharks. So whale sharks, you can actually, if you happen to see one, you can take a picture of that whale shark, and they actually have something similar to our fingerprints, a unique design on their back of spots. Well, we actually identified that those spots could be similar to the patterns that we see in the stars. And so therefore we have algorithms that look at star patterns and help you to locate your position and location in space. So we use that algorithm to actually help our scientists that are looking at whale sharks and to track the whales and to be able to tell which whale is what, and then create this larger catalog. Well, everyday people, fishermen or whoever, could actually help with that science.
Yeah. Real quick, Dr. Kramer, could you tell us a little bit more about that program? Dr. E said you could elaborate on that a bit, on the citizen science involvement observers. I just messed that name up really good.
No, it's fine. Yeah, so it's a big program that NASA runs. I have not been personally involved in it. I'm still relatively new to NASA and haven't kind of made my way in that direction. But what I will say is that atmospheric science and meteorology relies very heavily on citizen science. The National Weather Service, for example, has a network of just regular citizens who have weather observing platforms and instruments in their backyard. And young people can sign up for this. Somebody will come out and evaluate their space to see if they could put an official recording device in there. But even just if a severe storm comes through your neighborhood, the Weather Service relies on people reporting that hail fell of a certain size or there was wind damage. And so you can pick up the phone and call your National Weather Service and be an observer for them, and they rely on that information constantly. So I think of all the sciences, meteorology and atmospheric science really relies on just regular everyday people.
Yeah. So Janelle, you've been busy out there. Did I read correctly that you're working on basically 4 major projects right now, or involved in some way with them? 2 of which apply to Earth science. One of them has to do with the moon, the lunar stuff, and then I just thought it would be cool to hear about the lunar part, but to stay on topic for a minute, can you tell us a little bit more about things like what is called the multi-angle imager for aerosols?
Aerosols, and yes, Sentinel-6 and
Sentinel-6
SWAT.
and SWAT. And
I'm in
not SWAT like most people are thinking.
SWAT as in surface, water, and ocean topography. Oh, I got the name. Yes.
Yes, I'm impressed. Better you than me.
Yes. So I'm actually in a transition period right now. So I'm going to be rolling off the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, and becoming half of my time is going to be spent on Sentinel-6 and SWAT. And then I also have the multi-angle imager for aerosols, so I'm going to be all in on Earth.
So can you give us the quick overview of each of those areas in terms of what they do? Speaking of SWAT and the other ones.
Sure. So I'll start with the multi-angle imager for aerosols.
Yes.
Now, this is a mission that I've been a part of for about 3 years now, when it was really just starting, and it's one of my favorite missions ever, because it's very unique in that it's bringing epidemiologists or scientists who study disease and health issues in people together with the engineering and scientists at JPL who are going to be building this instrument in order to do a health study, a global health study. And so this instrument is going to be measuring pollution in cities around the world.
Wow.
And my role on that is to operate it once it gets into space, send it the commands, plan out what our commands are going to look like for the week, and talk to the scientists to understand what they want so that we can accommodate that in space and make sure everything is working. Everything stays safe and healthy, we say. We personify the instruments and the spacecraft that we operate because we're very close to them. You had mentioned something about, silence your devices unless you might get a call. Well, right now I might get a call for some of the missions that I'm currently working on that are in space. And this leads into Sentinel-6, which launched last November. And Sentinel-6 and SWAT are kind of a package deal, at least for me, because they're doing similar things. They're different instruments, different spacecraft, but doing similar things, measuring ocean levels, measuring water levels, so that we can better understand how our Earth is changing.
Wow. And I thought you had one more.
I have 4. So the multi-angle imager for aerosols, Sentinel-6, SWAT, and the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter.
Okay.
And on the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, I'll mention it briefly. I operate the Diviner instrument, which is a radiometer. Basically, it's helping to make a thermal map of the surface of the moon, which I think is really cool.
It's literally orbiting around the moon?
Right now. Yes,
okay.
It's currently. So 2 of my projects are currently in space. Sentinel-6, observing the Earth, and the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. The other 2 are being developed right now. And so at JPL, they're being built, they're being tested, and the multi-angle imager for aerosols are Maya, and SWAT are those 2.
Right, gotcha. And this is a quick technical question. When something's orbiting around the moon, because of the gravitational pull there is different. That's a unique orbit, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not on the navigation team, and the spacecraft team is actually run out of Goddard. It's talking about these partnerships. JPL operates one of the instruments, but really a lot of this mission is run by Goddard. So I talk to them almost every day, and they have a team that talks about maneuvers that they do in order to keep us in the proper orbit, so that the instruments can make the observations.
Like okay,
exactly.
Okay, well that's good. I'm glad I asked, because there's another opportunity for folks. So
yeah.
So I wanted to spend the last 10 or 15 minutes with you guys talking about specifically that. From each of you to hear, you've been on an early path with it, Janelle, so you can speak very closely to it, because you've been at JPL about 5 years, so you're fairly recently out of school and that type of thing. But I think for all three of you, if I could hear from each one of you your perspective about Dr. E. We were talking earlier about NSBE. And tell a little bit what that means and what they do and the chapter, et cetera, so forth. So maybe we can start with you and then kind of take it around the room.
Ooh, that's dangerous, because I do so much with my NSBE Junior chapter.
Okay, well, we got 15 minutes. No, go ahead.
So NSBE is National Society of Black Engineers. And for people that aren't aware of it, it started off as a collegiate exercise in providing African Americans or people of color with opportunities to have a professional organization that would be very supportive of them. It's one of the largest run collegiate, professional organizations in the world, with international chapters as well as national chapters. Typically there's a huge convention, which would have just occurred 2 weeks ago. And it typically happens the last week of April, and they're in different locations. So we've even started to take it from nationally to international. We did Canada 1 year. I really find that when people arrive at the national convention, that's when they're wild, because it's grown to about 15,000 people.
Wow.
And, actively attending the conference. And so it's wonderful to see so many different people of color, more brown skin than normal, to be in a technical environment presenting educational opportunities as well as professional. And so from when you move from the collegiate, and the fact that these collegiate chapters occur, very similar to, which remind me to like Tau Beta Pi, which is the Honorary Engineering Society, or SWE, Society of Women Engineers, or maybe some of the other professional organizations. The chapters, though, have this mantra to really support our communities and to promote education. Matter of fact, Ariel, come here real quick. Hurry up, quickly. Come quickly. We got the world waiting. Come on down, because for her to see. Say the mission statement.
The NSBE mission statement is to increase the number of culturally responsible Black engineers who excel academically, succeed professionally, and positively impact the community.
Great job. Thank you.
So we know what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, so Ariel's not, she does engineering and STEM. So we do a wide variety of STEM.
No kidding, Mom.
But she wants to do medicine. So she, she's really kind of spreading her wings and doing a lot of things. But she is the co-captain for one of our robotics teams. And we're actually, as of this,
that's exciting.
2 weeks ago, we won the national championship for.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah, first
that's
robotic.
Awesome.
It's for NSBE Nationals. So it's a smaller venue than the large first robotics, but they did make it to states this year. And then that actually primed them up well to compete very, very well at the NSBE Nationals. So we do robotics, we do VEX first, Lego. And we have teams that start from kindergarten on up through our high school teams. We also had 3 teams compete last year that were going to go to nationals for VEX. Then we have Math Counts, and we won the Math Counts video challenge this year for NSBE, but we actually came in second place nationally last year. So our video is a math-based video, but our kids solved the problem co-ed, and it's an aerospace related video. So we have Sheroes and Heroes from history, Black heroes and heroes from history that helped to get the cure back from a Artemis-like space station.
Yeah. So listen, I don't mean to cut you, but I do want to be able to get Dr. Ryan and Janelle in, but I did want to ask you before I go to them, just share your perspective. So your daughter is lucky because she has you that knows what you know, but share your perspective on the importance of networking and being involved in organizations like NSBE and some of the other organizations you named, and projects like the robotics, et cetera, and so forth.
Yeah, so the robotics is a big one, but we also partner with our chapter. This is how important the partnerships span, because we also offer Mandarin and Spanish. And so we partner with DCPS students and schools to do that. We also have a huge partnership with Blacks at Microsoft. So we have a Microsoft partnership where we have a code academy. And so it's 3 years of that. And now it's being replicated across the country based on what we started our chapter. Coding is the basic of so much science and technology that we instantly can weave it into our robotics, and our kids are exposed to this starting as young as 5 years old. And so it's in a great way, in a safe environment for students of color to learn about STEM. And so that's primarily what we're promoting with the NSBE Junior chapter. Our volunteers, though, come largely from the collegiate. So we have students from Howard University, we have George Mason, and we have GW, George Washington University, and we have students from UDC that all volunteer to help with our students in some of the challenges that we mentioned. I also have aerospace competition and future city competition. And so we had, prior to COVID, we had 70 competition teams that were done with volunteers supporting us, and even some from our NASA facilities.
So what you're really saying is we could just do a show on just this. Easily.
We could, but I'm saying that it takes a lot. So I actually have partnerships with our own NSBE Junior chapter from Goddard. We have the fire chapter, and so they partner with us on 1080. So it takes a community. We say it takes a village, yes, right, to educate our children, and that's primarily what NSBE Junior is about.
Gotcha. Thank you, Dr. Kramer. What's your take on networking and getting involved and things like that? Or your advice to young people wanting to get into what you do or what any of you do that are on the show today?
Yeah, networking is, of course, an important part of finding a career path. I think one thing that has always stuck with me is one way that I found is useful for networking is just to get involved, volunteer for a professional organization or just any organization. I think we think of networking as you have to approach somebody and be a really big extrovert and find something to talk about. But if you're working on something with other people, you'll just naturally network with them. Right. And so my experience has been volunteering for a meteorology professional organization. And I'll work on something small, could be helping to plan a networking event. But through that, I've met high-ranking officials from government agencies and from companies. You never know what doors are going to open just by saying yes and getting involved.
Great. That's great advice. And that really kind of dovetails with what Dr. E was just saying, the same thing. Get involved, get involved in projects, get involved in like-minded groups, and things will go from there. So we will go to the youngest on the set here and ask you, Janelle, what your perspective is.
I love that Dr. E spoke about NSBE. As a part of NSBE at MIT, I ran the outreach committee. We partnered with our local NSBE chapter that sent a balloon to space. We had a lot of fun, and getting the community involved has always been important to me. So when I moved out to California and, I got to JPL, I thought about ways to make it feel like a community. So part of what I've done at JPL is I've become president of the Black Excellence Strategic Team, one of JPL's many ERGs or employee resource groups. And the goal is to make the lab a more inclusive place. So that if you're moving away from your family, you feel a little bit alone or isolated, you have a community that looks like you, that can relate to your experience and help you on your journey. I also do a lot of other work in the community. I'm on the board of the Glendale and Pasadena YWCA, helping to run our programming for girls to encourage them and inspire them to get into STEM. Because I feel like, for someone like me to make it to NASA, The SARS, all of them had to align, all of them aligned. It started with a pamphlet, and I want it to be easier than that for the future generation. And so I think it's so important that for all of us who do make it this far and think, well, I'm just hanging on, or, I'm not sure how I got here. Let's do our part in making it easier for the future generations to get here too. Because I would love to see a workforce at NASA, at JPL, and in many other industries in STEM to be more diverse so that we can do even greater things.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Vince, I also wanted to mention too that
Sure.
Partnering not just with the professional organizations in the community important, but me sitting on boards. I was a former trustee for Howard University. I sit on the Industry Advisory Council for Minority Education at MIT. I've sat on boards at the National Academy of Sciences, Higher Education and Workforce. I mean, it's really important for us to have ability as scientists and practitioners, engineers, to infuse those changes or thoughts or help academia to educate the next generation. And so those are the other ways that we sort of network, partner, support the future generation.
You guys have said it all. As we wrap up, we have a couple of minutes left. Any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with our viewers as we wrap up? I can start with you, Dr. Ericsson, since we're speaking just now.
So I'm really looking and hoping for a bright future for all of us, right? And the continued education that run of the projects that I'm working on now is PACE, which looks at the ocean and atmosphere exchange of carbon dioxide. People often think of, just think about the global warming aspect, the warming up of the atmosphere, but they forget how important our oceans are. And so I would also encourage people to look at that as another way that we can be impactful to the environment on a day like, Earth Day. I feel it's a privilege to be able to support science and to help create the components and systems that help our scientists to really examine our world. And so we are more careful about how we treat it and how we support it and the things that we're doing in our environment every day. So thank you for letting me share that message.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Kramer?
Yeah, I caught on to something that Janelle said very quickly, which is we as scientists get to this point where we don't know how we got here. And I think that touches on something that I felt, and I'm sure most scientists have felt, that we like to call it imposter syndrome. This idea that you don't understand why you belong, or where you've gotten to where you've gotten, or you don't feel that you've earned it. Maybe you've gotten lucky, or you're a fraud. Remember that no matter how successful and how confident somebody sounds, they are experiencing the exact same thing, possibly on a daily basis. And so don't let your circumstances or your feelings of anxiety kind of dictate your path. Just knowing that we're all kind of struggling to understand our successes and how to reach certain places helps give you confidence to move forward. We're all nervous and anxious about interacting with others and comparing with ourselves to others. Don't worry about it and keep pressing forward.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Kramer. That's great. Janelle, I'm going to let you take us home.
Okay. First of all, happy Earth Day again. Earth is our home. Earth is our planet. Let's take care of it. Let's take care of it. It's the only home that we have. If I had any parting words, it would just be to not be afraid. We can be so scared to go after our dreams, to chase opportunities because we don't believe in ourselves. What would have been my future if I had known that MIT was this hard place and I wouldn't be able to get in before I applied? I'm sure that would have been reflected in the words that I used. I wouldn't have had that confidence and I wouldn't have just been me. So think about it. The next time that something comes before you, you have your chance to work for NASA, you're thinking about applying to a school to MIT, you have to go for it. And you have to believe in yourself in the process in order to make your story and your adventure really begin.
You guys are really, really inspiring. It's really, really cool to hear what all of you have to say. And I really thank you again for being on the program today. To our viewers and listeners, thank you for joining us today. I hope you found this show as enlightening, as inspiring as I know I have. Until next week, same time, same channel. For All Things Aviation and Aerospace, I'm Vince Mickens with the Private Air Media Group. Please remember to subscribe, take care of yourself, stay safe. Thank you, everybody, for being on the program. You guys take care.
Live long and prosper.